June 9th and Matthew Stafford isn't throwing yet, Bloom, but they swear to God he's going to be okay. All right. Top 5 injuries to watch.
Yeah.
Matthew Stafford might be at the top.
Yeah, and Monty Python, to my right, left, I don't know, my right, my left. He brought this up, and it stayed with me. You know, when I think about Rams in drafts I'm doing now, I think about, well, what does it mean that Matthew Stafford's arm needs? Because, you know, we had a Darius Leonard having back surgery, right? A sort of back situation. That's bad, right? Like, teams shouldn't be addressing injuries in June. There's a time in the offseason that you address the wear and tear of the previous season, right? That's at the beginning of the offseason. So when players are still, and we need Dr. Gene, we always think Dr. Gene close to our hearts, but sometimes there's situations where you think hope offseason rest will clear up the situation, and you get far enough into the offseason that it hasn't cleared up, and then the treatment implies that, well, rest alone wasn't enough. Sometimes it ends up being nothing. And look, Matthew Stafford's a veteran. Matthew Stafford playing at less than 100%. You know, how many times do we hear about quarterbacks playing with a torn labrum, like Phillip Rivers or Tom Brady or whoever?
Right.
Depending on the type of quarterback, like they'll grit their teeth and play through it. And the Rams offense is good enough that even Matthew's 80%, 70% Matthew Stafford could probably still make it more than viable for fantasy football when you look at how they're going to match up with opponents. But it's definitely something that we should watch because it helps break ties. If you're looking at Allen Robinson, if you're looking at Cam Akers, if you're looking at players that the quality of the offense is going to really dictate whether they're a hit or a miss.
And that's the thing, Matt. It's not really about the player. It's about the players around him, especially when it's a quarterback. But Matthew Stafford not throwing in June is interesting.
Yeah, to me, the injection in your throwing elbow is more of a concern than anything. I mean, that to me seems like a very sensitive point. Now, I didn't stay at a Denny's last night and pick up a kid who like reached out for me and at midnight who didn't know me like someone would with Gene Bramwell. So I'm not qualified to like make big time assessments on, you know, on the health of that. But, you know, the dealing with something of that nature, I mean, you usually hear about shoulders, but you don't often hear about elbows being something that people
it makes you think of Roethlisberger, right? I mean, that's the last elbow that we can remember.
Yeah, and that's not a pretty elbow, you know. So, looking at it from that perspective, you know, if you're going to be, it just depends on your risk factor. Right now, if you're playing in best ball leagues, do you take the chance on that? Maybe because if his value starts to decline some, you can take the chance on it and see how that works out for you. But, you know, the way I'm projecting it right now is I kind of more go worst case scenario and then try and bump it back up to the positive. So right now, John Wolford's getting 8 games out of me. And I'm lowering Stafford in this whole offense to an extent because I'd like to see how the worst case is going to affect the rest of the players around the Rams if this happens. Now, if it happens early enough, if we see danger signs with Stafford early enough, maybe they do make a trade for a 1-year guy. Maybe a Jimmy Garoppolo winds up there. I don't think so, because in the same division, unlikely. But you know, now I would laugh my behind off if, you know, Baker Mayfield wound up there, but I would still probably keep projections for John Wolford at that point. But maybe that's just because I'm busting on Baker.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit later. But what's interesting, Bloom, is this is the time of year, and Matt, of course, you keep up on everything. It's off-season fluff time, right? It's the best shape of my lifetime. Well, what about when it's not? And I thought that would make a fascinating topic and also a clicky topic. Yes, you're trapped in the YouTube algorithm. Thank you for being here with us. But Bloom, that's what was fascinating to me, because when you do the news, you read the news, you cover the news, it's not always like it's the greatest shape ever. Sometimes it's like, wait a second, this is a problem.
Yes, and Cease, there's a larger conversation here about the actual thing and then how it gets filtered through media and then what we receive, right?
Right.
So there's a conversation here about, like you said, positive is the norm, and we disregard it as meaningless in a lot of situations, at least when it fits those cliches, like you said, best shape of his life, whatever, or other ones that we hear about, you know, wide receivers, quarterbacks, these off-season narratives that don't bear fruit. But injuries are a discrete thing that you can measure, and how often we hear about these situations, and then whether a player underperforms or exceeds expectations. And even in those situations, it can be based on something individual to the player's physiology, and it's not necessarily something that we can take a lot of meaning out of, but we can put a pin in it. And as Dr. Gene is always with us when we're talking about injuries, right? Mm-hmm. But I hear Dr. Gene's voice saying, let's wait for training camp. I want to see him throwing. I want to see full practices at training camp. I at least want to see him play in a preseason or whatever. The idea is there's a benchmark where we say, as long as he does this in training camp, then we probably put this behind us. But if it continues to give us the signal that he's not really, if just he's get shut down for a week during training camp or something like that, then we have to be much more open to the scenario that Matt describes.
Yes, and Matt, that's the thing as we stare at our friend Dr. Gene Bramall oh so longingly, and we will see him soon to be sure on this show. That's why I'm really focused on Drumbeats. It's a conversation we've always had on this show. Like, watch for the drum beats, listen for the drum beats of the offseason. They're very important if they lead to something else, but you can be ahead of the game. You can certainly be ahead of your league mates if you listen for the drum beats.
No, without a doubt. And, fine picture right there, I got to say. I'd like to channel Gene Bramall, but the problem is instead of getting a squirrel in my front pocket, I wound up with a groundhog in my backyard. So, again, he's hard to replace. So I'm glad that he'll be, joining us at some point, but it does make sense that you want to take incremental steps with what you're looking at. And in order to do that, you have to be able to monitor what's happening as it's happening and try and assess it, for what it's worth. And if you take that cautious approach and it continues to build, in the manner that you just described so aptly, then you're ready to make conclusions. And sometimes too, when you see news later on, if you've just kind of missed the entire off season and it jumps in, you don't really understand. You may not process the value of the weight of each event in the perspective that maybe one needs to. Certainly, depending on where you get your news. Now, if you're going to like TikTok or social media, then most likely, if you're just not reading a news point, but you're reading someone who is really there for entertainment, if they're just trying to provide entertainment and give you something that's going to be very alarmist or very sarcastic, and those things are fun and we can have a good time with all of that. But I would recommend, if you're looking at something that's really strictly about trying to be newsworthy rather than entertainment worthy, you'll probably get the perspective you need. Whereas if you go and look at these drum beats when someone's trying to make a joke out of it to get clicks, or to be alarmist about it to get clicks, as if like they're having a drink at a party with their red Solo cup, then you're probably going to get a lot of the emotion that you feel out of reading something is probably going to have more weight than it's worth, or less weight than it's worth.
And Bloom, no injury reports. So when Jonathan Taylor misses mandatory minicamp for undisclosed reasons, we have no idea what this is. And because it's Jonathan Taylor, I get a little nervous, Bloom. So either add to my nerves or talk me down with Jonathan Taylor. What do we know? And, well, how close are you watching this one?
I'm not watching it that closely, just because I understand why you'd really err on the side of caution with your running back. But again, you put a pin in it and you come back to it. I really just want to use it as an opportunity to talk about Nyheim Hines. That's all. I mean, I have a type, right? We had Frank Reich say, if I play fantasy football, I take Nyheim Hines, and Matt Ryan loves Nyheim Hines. I just want to I think something that what you really need to put a pin in here, folks, is all of the observers of the Colts offense, all the beat writers are saying, wow, the offense is running with passes coming out on time and accurate, and it just looks like a different offense. And that could create, whoever you want to put it on, Michael Pittman, hey, Wally Cox at the end of your draft, maybe even Jonathan Taylor, just even more solidly as the number one overall pick, because this offense is going to get better, I think. So that's what I'm watching there. But Cecil, I do want to take the steering wheel for a second and tell you that just like 2 minutes ago, Cecil, 2 minutes ago, Adam Schefter tweeted, the Walton Penner Broncos ownership group has had conversations with Peyton Manning about an advisory role in the organization that could eventually mean being part of the ownership group and having equity in the franchise. Per sources, were you the source? Because you've been telling us this for years.
Yeah, Adam's a little late on that one.
Yeah.
If it just happened per the time of this recording, I was like, oh, yeah, Manning.
I can only imagine what the office will be like.
Which one?
Yeah. He'll probably sleep in there. Well, I don't know.
Oh, yeah,
maybe.
sure.
I don't know.
Home office, away office, office, everywhere you go. It's office.
He'll have to
Okay,
get a bed there.
Matt, let's talk about the Colts offense. And Bloom, this almost ties into Najee Harris. Do you want to do any little Najee thing here? Because what we're talking about is there's Paris Campbell drumbeats, okay? And certainly Michael Pittman and Matt Ryan going off. So Bloom, before we hand the baton to Matt, because this does tie into Najee, like, hey, Najee's going to do less. Just so everybody should know, I don't care that he's 245, whatever. But I think this little Jonathan Taylor thing, we all think, he's going to lead the league in carries. And yeah, okay, that's fine. He probably will still. But this offense could have more life, more balance, more of other players, not named Jonathan Taylor.
Right. And remember, they signed Philip Lindsay, too. We used to think he was good. Maybe he's still good. You know what all this makes me think, Cease, is just how important situation is for running backs. Because what if Najee Harris was a Colt and Taylor was a Steeler? Do you think we would be very interested in Jonathan Taylor, the Steeler, as a fantasy running back with the offensive line they have, with the running game they have? I mean, could he do anything more than Harris did last year? So, and if you put Harris on the Colts, maybe we would be talking differently about Harris. So I just think that you're buying the situation here as much as you're buying the running back. And even if, and to make a long answer short and wind it up, even if the offense is more balanced and more things work, so they use more of the passing game, it's still going to result in an overall more efficient offense and defenses that are more off balance. So I think Matt Ryan is only a good thing. I mean, there's a debate here. I started it with somebody a couple of weeks ago. Who is better? Phillip Rivers 2020 or Matt Ryan 2022? I think it's probably Matt Ryan 2022. So I think
by a mile.
Yeah. So it's all optimism. And with Harris, Cease, I think this is a situation where we might latch on to a piece of information. Okay, Najee Harris won't get 90% of the touches and snaps. Maybe he'll only get 80%. It's still very high for running back one, but there's touches that the Steelers, like, no one wants to talk about the Steelers' offensive line.
Right.
It's a mess. It's an absolute mess in terms of coaching. It's a mess in terms of personnel. It's a mess in terms of, James Daniels. That's the best thing you could say about him. Maybe James Daniels tailing off with the Bears, which is the result of funk the Bears offense was in. That's our optimism. So I think Harris is easy to fade. I know they say volume is king, but at a certain point, volume also is like rotten and past the expiration date on the shelf.
Well, can you rip off some big runs? Because I believe Jonathan Taylor had 200 less snaps than Najee Harris last year. Jonathan Taylor's fine. Well, he was fine last year, Matt. So let's talk about this Taylor situation, the undisclosed injury, which we don't really know, your concern level, and then just the changes. You're chomping at the bit to talk about Matt Ryan for good reason. I think this is something fantasy GMs need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, well, if they there wasn't a mass influx of great quarterbacks into the AFC, Matt Ryan would probably be the low-key. He would probably be, instead of being like kind of the dark horse quarterback of this group and make this team. But I've been saying this on almost every episode. Count on the Matt Ryan's team beating a prominent favorite in the playoffs at least one game, at the end of this year. Because that's how good he's going to make this team. He was not, production wise, maybe it wasn't great, but name a wide receiver that you remember that the Atlanta Falcons had last year. And that's actually worthwhile. And I know people are like pumping up Russell Gage. But let's be serious for a moment. They didn't really have anything but Kyle Pitts. And when you have a rookie who's getting double covered all day long, and you have to convert your other wide receiver who can't really play wide receiver to running back so that you can dump down and have a running game, there wasn't much there for Matt Ryan. And he also had an offensive line that probably rivaled the Steelers in terms of, just decrepitude. So now he's behind one of the best offensive lines in the league. And what people forget is always happens with the running game too. I always hear fantasy people talk about, well, this running back's not that good, or now he's great. And then you hear it's because of the offensive line. It's a mutually beneficial thing. Joe Mixon, for instance, is an elite talent at running back. Just because he's an elite talent doesn't mean he's going to get elite production. You need a great offense, a good enough offensive line to maximize or optimize that production. Jonathan Taylor has both. So that gives you the reason why he has far fewer carries. And you look at a Najee Harris and say, well, we're fading him. I look at Najee Harris and I think, well, yeah, all you have to do is look at running back stats and look at stats from a fantasy perspective for the past 5 years, or play fantasy football for 4 to 5 years to start to realize a pattern that certain backs usually don't get that many touches. So of course they were going to try to wind that back a bit so they don't wear him out, within 2-3 years. But at that, from that standpoint, yeah, maybe he's not a top 5 running back. Maybe he won't reach those numbers because they may not have the experience at quarterback, but they do have, and they don't have that great offensive line. But I think he'll have enough volume and skills from what I've seen him be able to do with that difficult situation to still be a viable running back one, even if you fade him from top 5 land. But Jonathan Taylor, I'm trying to remember Alex's last name, but he's our guy on Footballguys TikTok, and he talked about Alex Caruso, who's doing a lot of work on TikTok, and made a great point about, that there's no running back that has repeated as running back one in recent years. So it's unlikely that Jonathan Taylor will be that way if you play the odds. But this is an important point to remember, is that unless you just have fun trying to play that whole lottery of really spending your whole summer trying to figure out who's going to be running back one because you got nothing else better to do, to me, I'm not trying. It's all about not trying to hit bullseyes, but hitting the target.
Right.
And to me, the RB1 target, Jonathan Taylor is firmly in that. And with Matt Ryan and his ability to make good decisions, throw accurate timing balls, and actually execute an offense where you want to be able to drop back 3, 5, 7 steps. Matt Ryan's always been great at that, and he's underrated at the playground ball aspect, whereas Carson, Wentz is great at the playground ball aspect, but the things that you expect them to do down in and down out, I mean, his feet never land in the same way twice, from drop to drop, and that affects his accuracy. It's always been that way.
Well, it depends on the playground, because you have to be in his church group to be in his playground. But Matt, I'll tell you both this, and that's a pretty deep one if you know the story behind the scenes. But anyway, no one's going to want to face the Colts in the playoffs.
No,
nobody. They're going to be a tremendously tough out. I can see a team, let's say like Denver. Hey, everybody, we made it. We're in the wild card, whatever. And Kansas City, oh man, we just almost beat Kansas City. And then you face Indy and you don't win a playoff game. Like the Indianapolis Colts will be a tough out. You will be MFing, sorry, Joe, your team if they face the Colts in the postseason.
The AFC North teams and AFC East teams don't have a chance against the Colts in the playoffs this year.
Except for Buffalo.
They might, maybe. But I think the Colts have a good enough defense that it could be a tight game.
Yeah,
they're gonna make it a game.
I just wish this Darius Leonard thing is ominous. I want to piggyback off a couple of things from what Matt said. First of all, on the Taylor number one doesn't repeat. And I think Alex bringing that up, it's, these are all good data points.
Yeah.
What it reminds me of, though, is back in the day, guys. Do you remember the year that LT was going number one and everyone said, but he's never actually finished number one? Remember that?
Yeah.
Wasn't that the year that was like his all-time amazing year?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Now, that could just be a coincidence. But the idea is you aren't taking the number one pick and trying to use it on a player that you're sure is going to be the number one pick. It's the one that, as you said, Matt, it's hitting the target that is going to be a stalwart, very likely to stay healthy, in the upslope of their career, alignment with situation in terms of quality of the situation, but also usage, the way the player is used. And why Najee Harris and where he's going in the draft might be a little different is in the bottom of the first round, well, maybe you are more compelled by a player who has the chance to be in the top 3, but also has more risk of falling out of the top 20 than Harris, who probably isn't going to fall out of the top 20, but doesn't give you a chance of really flirting with that elite alignment of situation, talent, and usage, which takes me to Saquon Barkley. And you talk about, being in a miserable offense, just a miserable situation, the Chicago offense. Barkley is now with Brian Dable talking about, the 5-head. Talking about, so you got to watch us live on YouTube or go to YouTube and watch us after, and you'll know what I'm talking about.
He's the King of the Hill character.
Yeah. So Barkley saying he's being moved around as much as he has been since college, right? This gets back around to rational coaching. It gives you hope, and he seems excited. And I think these are also the kinds of off-season news that's not just the piece of news. It's what it indicates as potentially as the iceberg and what's under the water of the Giants offense, not just being revitalized in terms of tactics, but enthusiasm, except, we'll see about Daniel Jones. He's the key to the whole thing. But I think that usage and situation are the elements, external elements that aren't under running back's control that really separate them when it comes to fantasy.
It is the Audible Live here. Cecil Lammey, Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman joining you. Check out footballguys.com. Sign up for our free daily newsletter available at footballguys.com. All the latest news straight to your inbox with takes by yours truly, Sigmund Bloom and Joe Bryant. We definitely appreciate you for doing that and checking out footballguys.com. You want to support the show? Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a vid, and subscribe to footballguys.com as Matt holds up his phone. Daniel Jones. Yes. All right. This may not be in someone's top 5, Bloom, but it is for me because, well, I've got Rams running backs in my dynasty leagues and I love Kyren Williams, but Darrell Henderson also hurt. So I hate to turn this into a Rams show, not a Broncos show. But what's going on in that Rams backfield?
Yeah.
Because Henderson and Kyren Williams both banged up behind Cam Akers.
Yeah, this reminds me of part of the conversation I had with Dwayne McFarland on the couch. We were talking about Cam Akers, and Cam Akers is going to be one of those propositions. His cost is 3rd round. Might even fall to the 4th round. I don't know. So it's not that steep of a cost for Cam Akers, but his situation looks great, pending, of course, Matthew Stafford and his arm, and whether that doomsday scenario about John Wofford comes to fruition. But it looks like Akers is going to get the lion's share of this backfield. He's not going to be in anything resembling a committee. He's going to get goal line work. He has the potential to get a lot of passing game work. Kyren Williams has a broken foot now, right? So, any threat of him coming on as a rookie, because that's his strength in that role and lowering Akers' ceiling. But at the same time, while we did see him come back early from the Achilles last year, he wasn't good. He wasn't efficient. He didn't look like a player you'd be excited to take in fantasy football. He didn't make anything out of that great situation, right? Or not very much out of it. Had a costly fumble. So, there's upside for Cam Akers to finish in the top 6 or 8 running backs. But we also haven't seen him do it yet. So that's what I think of when I think of Darrell Henderson. And we can bring up Rashad Penny, too, as those kinds of running backs that to really prove that they're going to be an obstacle and factor that into my analysis and profile for the other players in the backfield, I need to see it. And I think Darrell Henderson has shown us that it's more likely he's going to stay nicked up. He's not going to get the full trust of the coaches, than that he's really going to be somebody who materially affects other players in the backfield and their ability to hit their ceiling.
Matt, how do you like looking at the Rams backfield?
I don't, because the only thing that I like is Cam Akers. I mean, I like that, but Kyron Williams, I feel about him. I think I like Daniel Jones better than I like Kyron Williams as a player. He can be decent as a scat back, catching short passes out of the backfield. I would probably trust Xavier Jones more than I would trust Kyron Williams as a decision maker, and as somebody with some burst. After, for me, Jake Funk, again, probably also in that same corner that I would put Kyron Williams on. He's a great special teams player.
They say Funk is working as the number 2 right now with Henderson and Kyron Williams banged up.
Yeah. To me, Henderson, I like, a lot. So if Henderson can get healthy, then you have a decent 1-2 punch with Akers and Henderson. And Henderson has improved enough that I don't think that the Rams like the lack of size. So they want to go with a bigger back. But I think Henderson has improved enough as a decision maker, and especially what he can do in the receiving game, that he's going to have a second opportunity with the team to be a nice scat back. But that's how the team's labeled him, unfortunately. So at this stage of the game, it's Akers or bust, if you ask me. They're going to have to bring in somebody else, and they're going to have to trade for You're either going to have to trade for a player or pick somebody off the waiver wire. And there's going to be some good backs who are going to be available off waivers come August. Whether it's a late round rookie, or a late round rookie who bumps a decent veteran off their roster. So I would anticipate that the Rams, if Henderson is not healthy, and Akers has any issues, even if Akers doesn't have any issues, if Akers is fine and Henderson's not healthy, that once they get a whiff of the guys that they drafted in camp over the past 2 years, and in the preseason, they'll be looking elsewhere.
The Audible Live. Bloom, are you worried about DK Metcalf at all? Or is that a contract thing? He's the foot injury.
Yeah.
And didn't he, it's so weird because I think he showed up to some voluntary stuff. At least he was there. And he's skipping mandatory. I don't know. Anyway, we're at the time of year where attendance matters.
Right.
But DK Metcalf not out there because of a foot or a contract or both.
Right. So this is where the new CBA rears its ugly head, right? So one of those things, a lot of those things slip down the memory hole, right? That the CBA was barely passed at the beginning of the pandemic. A lot of players very distraught.
Oh, they flim the players because they've put the rich guys against the NFL poor guys. But there's way more average salaried NFL players than there are loaded guys. So
right.
There you go.
So the new CBA really makes holdouts a thing of the past, a true holdout, because of the penalties. So whatever players saber rattle about not showing up, they're all showing up, right? Even Kyler Murray showed up. They're all showing up except DK Metcalf. So that's kind of notable, I guess. He's got officially unexcused from a mandatory team activity. All the other players that we were looking for, I think even Deebo Samuel was expected, he was there. So I think that's notable. But if we're projecting forward to DK's fantasy outlook, there's a group of wide receivers in the 3rd, 4th round that you can do a best case, worst case for all of them, right? Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin, and there's a big range of outcomes because of volatility in the offense. Jalen Waddle is a player I like in that range. Allen Robinson is a player I've gravitated to in that range at times, just because I want to believe that he, with a good situation, he can show us he can still be great. But they're all a mixed bag with a wide range of outcomes. And if you want to get talked into DK, I would say it's just that you hope that Geno Smith's the starter, and he was good with Geno Smith, productive last year. Now, if it's Drew Lock, and there's a lot more signs sound familiar, there's something there. There's something there that can be unlocked in Drew Lock. And you're hearing that, which even if it's just a bunch of fluff, it's getting the fans prepared for the idea that he's going to be the starter. That's not good for DK Metcalf. How was that for Cortland Sutton?
Did I say it on last week's show, Bloom? I can't remember. I think I said it on Nigga Cesar. Locke might not make the 53.
Right.
So
yeah. I mean,
go.
if it's merit, if it's based on merit,
fluff, and then there's the stuff people are saying behind the scenes. So
yeah, well, and I mean, if it's merit, if it's based on how he actually plays, then yeah, they should move on. I mean, really, they should just wait and trade for Baker Mayfield and get like 14 million of his salary paid or something like that. That's at least going to be better than what they have. But that's the volatility that comes with DK Metcalf. He did perform okay with Geno Smith, but that offense looks like it's going to be miserable. Except Crackshot in the chat room asked Walker or Penny. Walker's the player that interests me there because he's like an 8th or 9th round pick, and Walker
Penny's already hurt again,
right? And Walker, we're talking about alignment. Right. I mean, I'll toss this one over to Matt Waldman. The way the Seahawks run the ball, Matt, and the way that Kenneth Walker runs the ball, is there alignment there?
Yeah, I think there is. It's just, it's again about whether or not there's going to be optimal game scripts to actually run the football in Seattle. And I would argue that if it's not Geno Smith, there won't be. Whether they trade for, unless they trade for someone better than Baker Mayfield, I mean, they're going to go for that as a possibility. And then DK Metcalf is going to be throwing tantrums on the sideline. Because if you think Odell Beckham was going to throw tantrums on the sideline, if DK Metcalf threw some tantrums on the sideline with Russell Wilson, just wait till what happens when Baker Mayfield gets to town. Yeah. I'm very low on DK Metcalf right now this year, just because I don't think, he's a limited route runner. He's good at what he does. He's great at what he does, but he's limited and he needs the type of quarterback to be in that situation. And I just don't think he's going to be put in good enough situations to thrive, and he's going to get very frustrated.
It seems like frustration. Like one of the things that we end up coming back to is there are going to be a handful of offenses that are just miserable and really drag like a weight everybody in the offense down at the bottom of the ocean, with a few exceptions. And that's where you have to be willing to be out on players in those offenses that cost a premium pick. That's DK Metcalf.
Yeah.
But Walker, because he's an 8th round or 9th round pick, and because he has a chance to be one of the only good things about this offense, I'm interested in him. But you can look at the same with Atlanta, like Kyle Pitts when you're deciding about him. You can look at Chicago with Darnell Mooney and David Montgomery. These offenses, I don't know how they're going to get the engine to turn over. I don't know how they're going to get out of the driveway this year.
Well, it's a fun conversation with that, because you do want to bet on talent after a certain point in the draft. Once you get to a certain round, and I think that's a great point, Bloom, when you talk about someone like Walker, who's a fine talent, and Penny, if Penny can stay healthy, based on where you're going to be able to get them. And the same thing goes with guys like, you look at Montgomery and how he played, even with the disaster that was Matt Nagy going, hey, we don't have much of an offensive line, so let's put him in situations where we're going to get Justin Fields killed, because we're going to make him take 5-step drops on situations where there's no way that anyone no coach in the NFL would otherwise do that, with the alignments that they had. So, you look at situations like that and realize that if players produced in those awful situations, it's going to get better, or you would think it will get better, maybe not overall in terms of talent, but efficiency in how the talent's being used. So that can make guys wise bets, like some of the Chicago players that you're seeing there. But no, I'm with you in this regard, and that certain players get sunk just based on the idea of who's around them. I mean, if there was already talk that the Browns might bring back Odell Beckham after what happened, that tells you enough that they are done with Mayfield. And I just think that if I were thinking the worst of DK Metcalf and thinking, well, he's just maybe an immature young man who's used to having things go his way, on a regular basis on the football field. And now he's going to and now his best shot is Geno Smith, and he might be okay with that. But even so, he might be thinking, I need some time off to like get myself mentally prepared for what this season's going to be like. I think that might be what's going on here, is that idea of like, how do I get mentally prepared? It would be like if, we found out Daniel Jones became a football guy and he was going to be on the Audible. I might have to take 2 months off to get mentally prepared for that idea.
There's certainly people like that in the Denver media that I'm like, please don't hire them, please. And I'll say this, like, imagine if you were on the verge of getting massively paid, but you weren't going to get the quarterback play to get massively paid. That's what DK's doing.
Exactly.
DK's dealing with that right now. So
he knows he's getting the shaft, and he's upset about that. Yeah.
Then you bring up Matt Nagy. I'm like, anything would have been better than Matt Nagy. You'd give Tyrone Biggums a headset, a clipboard, some crack. Sorry, Joe. And he'd be like, hey, is that time for that 5 o'clock free football giveaway?
Just do what you want to do, man.
The show is off the rails. Anyway,
Jason.
I'll give you a choice.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I love giving you choices.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about injury situations with Jacksonville running backs, Raiders running backs, or Ravens running backs. Which one's most important? Because Jacksonville, you have James Robinson news, Travis Etienne, great news about him coming out of Jacksonville. With the Ravens, you have Dobbins and Edwards, both probably on the same track there. It's a Mike Davis conversation now. Then with the Raiders, kind of similar to Jonathan Taylor, we don't really know what's going on with Josh Jacobs. But then there's Kenyon Drake, who we know Jacobs was able to do more last year because Drake wasn't healthy. What if Drake's healthy? So I'll give you a choice, my friend, my brother.
Yeah.
Raiders, Ravens, or Jags. Which one would you want to talk about?
Real quick before I answer that, and I will answer it quickly, I just want to go back to the Matt and Ryan show. We talk about Matt Ryan, and there's the Matt and Ryan show in Chicago, and Matt brought up David Montgomery. I just want to put this out there as something else I'm going to watch because it's a new regime. Khalil Herbert looked pretty damn good when he got to play.
For sure.
And David Montgomery's a free agent next year. And who wants to give a running back a second contract? It's really in the interest of the Matt and Ryan show, part 2, to see what Herbert can do this year, to know if they need to maybe bring back Montgomery on a 1 or 2 year deal, see what Herbert's ready to do. Yeah, they don't. So just put that in the back of your mind. At some point this year, that situation might flip like whiplash, where, hey, it's a new regime. Herbert has really not looked like that much lesser of a back as a runner, and he's been adequate at least as a receiver already.
He's great at the Senior Bowl. That's a bong grip for Jason.
There you go. So let's talk about Baltimore. Let's talk about Baltimore's running backs because, first of all, each of the top 2 running backs come back from ACL tear. Suffered, was it within a day of each other or a couple of days of each other, right? One of the oddest things before the season started last year. So timing wise, they should be okay to be ready for the beginning of the season because of how early the injuries happened, but easier said than done. I think any of us, unless we've been NFL running backs and tore our ACL and had to come back from the surgery, don't really understand how there's still a range of outcomes for some players. Just don't look, Saquon Barkley comes up again. How much of last year was just 1 year removed from the injury, and in year 2 you'll see him get everything back. So that opens the door, but it's also, again, this idea that the Ravens are going to return to the 2019 Ravens. I mean, their personnel moves sure make it look like they are, right? A lot of running the ball, and last year it was miserable, but this year they want to get back to that offense. Now there's Lamar Jackson in that ongoing saga, but assuming he's there and he's ready, this is going to be the running game face of the offense. And what did we see that year? The running game efficiency wise was golden. So what's interesting here is, could it be Mike Davis? Okay. Mike Davis is adequate, competent. Tyler Beatty's really interesting because he's a player that's outperformed his expectations. He outperforms what you would think a player, if you look at him, would be capable of. And if this running game is creating efficiency, then he's going to get some chances to take advantage of that, at least in camp in the preseason with these backs coming back from the ACL tear. So I think the Ravens running back situation and injuries is definitely one we need to watch with hopes that they can regain that glory from 2019.
Matt, I'll give you the same question. Raiders, Ravens, or Jaguars? And by the way, it was Aaron, who wanted, and then when Bloom did not choose the Raiders, he went, heartbreak. Don't break Aaron's heart, Bloom.
Don't go break him.
Well, we'll do the Raiders for Aaron, but I do want to touch upon the Ravens and just say, what's smaller than a motorboat, like that has actually like
you got a little dinghy.
A motorized
hydrofoil.
Yeah. Bloom's type with running backs are like the motorized dinghies.
Jet ski.
Love
Bloom's
the jet skis. A Sea-Doo,
Sea-Doo.
exactly.
There you go.
Loves the Sea-Doo backs.
Yeah.
It's got the squirter on the back.
Yeah, exactly. He loves those little guys, man. So, but I mean,
sorry, Joe. That's three sorry Joes in one show.
But
yeah, they were asking
Dobbins. Go ahead.
Well, because I'm just someone asked on Twitter a little while back, how many players in IDP leagues do you start? And I said, if it's not a full D, I'm not interested. And people thought that was really funny.
There we go. See. But yeah, I'm big on Dobbins, and I thought Dobbins was the most talented back in his class, just slightly above Jonathan Taylor. And if that offensive line stayed healthy along with him, we would have seen that maximized potential last year. I think he was on his way towards that. Maybe he has another year to go before that happens, but I think he is a buy low in Dynasty if he is being bought a little bit lower than I think he's a top 15 player for the next 2 to 3 years. Overall, I think this year may be a little lower, but the next two I think are going to be really strong for him. And then when you talk about the Raiders, yes, Josh Jacobs is one of those players that talent-wise, he should be a top 10 back every year in terms of talent. What he can do as a receiver, what he does between the tackles, he's a gritty, smart runner, but he can't stay healthy. He's kind of like the higher end version of Duke Johnson in the sense that Duke Johnson can't seem to put two to three quarters together more than one game out of every 3 years. And with Jacobs, you seem to see that issue with him, whereas like Duke Johnson is Bloom's Sea-Doo guy. Josh Jacobs is kind of like my motorboat guy, who we both end up stranded out in the water, and we're looking at each other as Bob Henry blows by us, and in his boat, with his kids riding out there.
Boat.
Yeah,
Bob
exactly.
Guy.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but he's, you look at the situation and with the talent that they have, the way Derek Carr played last year, and getting a player that he clearly has a great rapport with, on and off the field, we're looking at the Raiders offense that I would elevate Carr a little bit more. And by proxy, I think if Jacobs' issues turn out not to have any drum beat to them, I think you feel pretty strong about him as a no worse than a top 20 back, easily a top 15 back, I think. And giving you a shot at strong production. Whereas with Kenyon Drake, I like the idea of Kenyon Drake in terms of, he could take away touches for you. But the fact that they've drafted Zamir White, I think is both a short-term, Kenyon Drake is kind of unreliable with his decision-making. And Josh, and we know that Jacobs is unreliable with his week-to-week health and ability to carry a large load without having to limp through part of the season, even if he does it in gritty fashion. So, yeah, I agree with Drake, with that on Drake. I mean, one too many hits to the head by the lineman's butt, is basically, what's happened to him, I would say, in terms of, his play. But overall, The Raiders, I think, are in a pretty good situation to be one of the stronger offenses in the league. And they're going to have to be, because I think that defense isn't good enough, and they're going to be chasing a lot of their rivals in the AFC West.
Okay, it is the Audible Live. Bloom, let's give a tiny bit of love for Jacksonville.
Mhm.
I did want to talk about all three, but
Yeah.
I gave you guys a choice. But let's talk Travis Etienne, because
Yeah.
he's blowing it up on the newswire.
Yeah, it's optimism. It's optimism about James Robinson too, and then we have Snoop Connor, the 5th-round pick. Robinson a little ahead of Achilles' schedule and his rehab there. ETN, we circle back around to the name that comes into mind at times about ETN. I think, Matt, you might have made this connection earlier as Tevin Coleman. I mean, I'm not sold on ETN now. Again, Jacksonville's one of those. It can't be worse than last year. I guess Chicago can't decide if Chicago could be worse than last year, just because, really, without Allen Robinson, just not sure how. And their offensive line is just a mess. I'm not sure how they're going to handle what they do with Justin Fields, but it has to be better. Jacksonville, Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence, they have good investment on the offensive line at tackle. It has to be better, and because of that, maybe you want to get in on ETN. But I think Robinson is a guy that we can reliably count on him to exceed expectations. Whatever people think, wherever they're drawing the line and say he's not going to be better than this, he's going to do it. He did it again last year. He was the only good thing about that offense last year. So I think we still have to factor him in. And it's just, I think there's more optimism around ETN, but by week 8, week 9, I don't know if we're going to have clarity who to start week to week, unless it's both, because this is a really revived offense, which I'm open to, but I don't really expect it.
It's a Doug Peterson offense, Matt. So what do you think?
I think you're going to see definite improvement, because just the morale factor of that we're actually in a professional organization again is going to do wonders, and there's not going to be as many distractions, and that's going to be helpful, or oddball assessments, or decisions with what you do on the field, which can derail everything you do. Because that's the thing, the difference between good and great execution statistically often comes down to what, 10 to 15 yards per quarter. Well, if you do something stupid as a coach with your organization, you can derail enough with your players to make decisions where maybe they're minus 30 to 40 yards per quarter, because of the fact that you take a guy out or use them in situations that make no sense, or you're making assessments or asking them to do things that are just illogical. So I think just by the fact that you have a professional coach in there now, you're gonna see improvement from that perspective. Now, from Etienne, listen, Tevin Coleman can be decent from that perspective. I like Diego Lopez's thought about, can he be the DeAndre Swift we're looking for? I think he could be a DeAndre Swift type of guy in terms of catches out of the backfield, game scripts, forcing them to throw and check down a lot because they're close in the game, or slightly behind, and the defense is giving them that, and he racks up a lot of yards. But like Swift, who couldn't run between the tackles very well, and statistically that bore out that he was weak in that department last year, among the weakest backs in terms of his ability to earn yardage in those areas. That's where Etienne can be weak. I don't know if he's as weak as Swift in that area, but it's still an area where that, Robinson being a better version of Jamal Williams, that just bears out to me that you still want to look into Robinson as being a factor. So I don't think Etienne's going to ascend to, top 15 heights, but I think he can get into the top 25 for you. And I think that's a reasonable expectation, the low end of the top 25. And then Robinson, as he gets healthier, maybe if the offense does well, he can still be a top 20, 25 guy too.
Bloom, all I'd say is use Visca like Cordero Patterson. I'm the Visca truther, and not because of the CU thing, and not because my buddy Sam did a zombie movie with him when they were freshmen at CU. But no. If they used him, and they won't, he's not going to do anything. He's returning kicks. He doesn't even look natural doing it if you saw the footage. So they're trying. And what was there talk about moving to tight end or something like that, Bloom?
Right.
Somebody it's like, use them like Cordero. if Belichick gets his hands on him, because Lord knows they can't draft wide receivers. See Tyquan Thornton is the latest.
Or sign them by free agency either.
Yeah. Aaron suggests San Francisco. I'm like, yeah, because Debo don't want to run the ball anymore. Let Visca do it. Anyway, Sigmund Bloom, final thoughts.
Final thoughts is, guys, we've been doing this long enough. Well, first, a final thought I was going to say is everybody take moments to savor like the good stuff in your life, and getting to hang out with these two guys and getting to hang out with y'all here. This is one of the good things in my life, and I always savor it. If we do this long enough to watch things that we say and we even joke about become standard, like orthodoxy, and you say, move him to tight end. That's the thing. It's really a thing. If he doesn't work as a tackle, move him to guard. If he doesn't work as a big wide receiver, move him to tight end is really a thing now. I mean, Antonio Gandy Golden, JJ Arcega-Whiteside. There's even floating things out there like if N'Keal Harry wants to have a chance. So that really is a thing, and it's something to watch. And I think also another sign of how the game is changing, that there's a role for that player, that his skills don't work, and this set of skills needed to be proficient, but if you tweak the role a little bit, that player can work or add value. And then you mentioned Bill Belichick. And I just want to say this is a fun thing, right? Because in the offseason, we get a different Bill Belichick. We get a different Belichick than the scold, the glowering, whatever. He's the nighttime, and he beamed like the sun recently, and the quote was, "I love coaching." It was Mike Reese. If Mike Reese just tweets out a picture and a quote and it has nothing to do with insight about the team, it's just Bill Belichick glowing and saying, "I love coaching." And then it comes out today that he was actually snapping the ball to Mac Jones in practice. He was down there as the center snapping the ball to him. And Mac Jones said, "Yeah,
I just want to get close."
Exactly. He said, "Real hands-on." He said, "Real hands-on." And right?
No see-do jokes here.
Yeah, right. And the interesting thing is he really is leaning in on offense this year. This is really happening, folks. Yeah. It's just Freudian, right? So it's just seasons change, times change. Bill Belichick down there on the practice field, snapping the ball to his quarterback, explaining things about the running game. Hey, he's an eternal youth in his mind when it comes to football and loving being around the game. And hopefully the Patriots can use that to overcome their other deficiencies on offense.
I just hope he was wearing a jock. Matt Waldman, final thoughts.
It's just so much fun every week to just regress about 30 years, maybe 35.
We're all 12.
And have a good laugh and have a good, 45 maybe then at this point, and have a good laugh. Like we're at the lunch table doing things that would get us detention probably at the, back in our years, or saying things that would get us detention at that point. But, it's a fun time of year to, as we're getting to anticipate, what's going to happen with training camps and preseason, and seeing where these players are, how coaches, what coaches are thinking of them, or even what observers are saying. I like to joke around. I'm a big Skylar Thompson fan, and it's fun to see him in camp and see that, to see some people say, "Hey, look, there's been some practices where he looked like the best quarterback on the field." Does that mean that's going to translate to, to the preseason and beyond this year? Probably not, but it's still fun to see those little glimpses where they go, "Hey, everyone else struggled, but this guy's doing good, and he's working with Dan Marino." And so, it's fun to look for those anomalies, because that's what makes fantasy football fun, is that, the how-to guide is color within the lines. And if you want to be good enough to beat like people in your league who are all coloring, who don't really understand where the coloring book is, then, what we provide you oftentimes is how to color between the lines. But if you want to be great at fantasy football and you want to face top competition, sometimes you have to learn where to color outside the lines, or where to create your own design. And these opportunities to see who the anomalies might be are part of that key.
It is the Audible Live. We certainly appreciate each and every one of you. If you watch the end of the video, that helps the algorithm because nobody knows what the algorithm is. But anyway, yeah, that helps, puts us in front of people that don't know us and helps them to perhaps like us and subscribe to our channel, which helps the show. So do all those YouTube things, like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a vid. Follow Sigmund Bloom on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom. Matt Waldman is at Matt Waldman. I'm at Cecil Lammey. The show is at the Audible. We love you all. We appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for joining us and being part of the Audible. We are Sigmund, Matt, and Cecil.
Rascal the Infernal Demon.
Everyone out there, thanks for watching. Stay tuned and stay frosty. Oops. How about this?
Bye.